It is 3 a.m. in New York, 10 in Kiev, and 4 on a Thursday afternoon here in Seoul. I'm Moon Gon-young. You're watching ARIRANG Korea's only global network. We begin with the post-Sewol-ho ferry disaster. More than 3 weeks have passed since the ferry capsized off the southwestern coast of Korea, and over 30 passengers still remain missing. For more on the updates on that, our Kim Ji-yeon joins us live from the news center. Now, Ji-yeon, what are we learning of late?
Well, the ferry's operator will no longer be allowed to do business. The Ministry of Oceans and Fisheries says it will revoke the business license of the Chonghaejin Marine Company today. And the ministry did say earlier that it would start the process after formal investigations proceeded against the ferry operator. But in light of recent developments that demonstrate negligence on the part of the captain and crew members, it's clear the ministry is not going to wait.
Right. Speaking of investigations, Ji-yeon, the representative of the ferry operator, Han-sik, was arrested earlier this morning. He was charged on what?
Well, the CEO of the Chonghaejin Marine Company, Han-sik, was arrested on multiple charges that include negligent homicide. The prosecutors are trying to prove that the ferry operator had knowledge of the vessel's problems beforehand, but continued to transport passengers and cargo for the sake of profits. The investigative team says that the overloading of cargo on the Sewol-ho ferry would not have been possible without the approval of the ferry operator's CEO. And through the investigation into Kim, prosecutors are also trying to close in on the de facto owner of the ferry operator, Yoo Byung-won, for business irregularities that may have contributed to the ferry sinking. But the investigators are having a tough time getting close to those who are closest to you to show up for questioning. One of his sons, who has permanent residency in the United States, failed to appear for the third time today. So the prosecutors are seeking to force him into the country with the help of the FBI.
All right, let's shift our focus to the search efforts. There have been no additional bodies found for the past 24 hours because of the bad weather conditions down in Jindo. Any development in there? Well,
Kanya, operations were temporarily suspended due to strong currents, and it's getting dangerous for all of those involved. With search efforts continuing around the clock, there are a rising number of injuries among volunteers and officers participating. More than 20 divers have been taken to a nearby hospital after showing symptoms of decompression sickness, a diver's disease that includes acute pain in their bodies. And the Coast Guard official that was found unconscious yesterday is fortunately doing better today after undergoing surgery. More medical staff have been deployed to the scene since the civilian diver died earlier this week, but there's criticism that there needs to be more adequate measures to ensure the safety of the civilian search divers there.
All right, that was ARIRANG News' Kim Ji-yeon with the latest updates on the Sewol-ho ferry disaster. Thank you. The entire nation remains in a state of shock and grief over the Sewol-ho ferry sinking more than 3 weeks after the ferry capsized. But the place hit the hardest by this tragedy is Ansan, as it's a city that most of the victims called home. ARIRANG News' Shin Se-min reports on how the city is coming to terms with their grief.
A final trip around the school they once attended. For the 11th grade students of Tanwon High School who died in the Sewol-ho ferry tragedy, this drive-through campus in a slow-moving hearse signifies their last visit. It's also meant to bring some sense of closure to the living who are grieving over the loss of so many young lives. Ribbons and countless notes adorn the fence outside the high school, letters and messages that read, "I'm sorry, please come home safely." It's hard to find anyone in the city of Ansan who doesn't know someone directly affected by the disaster.
I came here to see those kids enter school in funeral hearses. I have a grandson who is a senior and attends the school. It breaks my heart to think of the suffering the teens and their families are going through.
Gojandong is among the hardest hit neighborhoods in the city. The working class area, composed of simple brick apartment buildings, was home to 109 students that were on the ferry.
What used to be a bustling school zone filled with groups of teenagers has changed. Residents describe a stillness now brought on by the loss of a high school and loss of the city.
Grief has shrouded the city of Ansan, which has a population of 710,000 people. It permeates every corner of the community and has taken a toll on local business. Shop owners say they've seen a considerable drop in their number of customers.
The area is grieving over the students who have died, such young students. It's completely understandable that sales have dropped.
The tragedy has brought this community together. The city's residents seek out comfort at a mass memorial hall in Hwarang Park, where they come to console one another. A sign that the tight community stands together in this most difficult time. Shin Se-min, ARIRANG News.
Well, today, May 8th, is Parents' Day here in Korea, and while it's a day many Koreans spend time with their parents and show their love and appreciation for all that their folks have done for them, this year, hundreds of parents are aching with sadness after losing their children in last month's Sewol-ho ferry disaster. Well, marking this day, President Park Geun-hye on her Facebook page vowed to make Korea a safe place to live so that the parents of the victims will not be hurt anymore. A majority of victims from this sunken ferry were high school students from the city of Ansan traveling on a field trip to the island of Jeju. President Park also thanked all parents in the nation for their sacrifices and devotion in raising their children and doing their very best to foster talented individuals. Meanwhile, on the political front, the ruling and opposition parties are electing their respective floor leaders on this Thursday. The ruling Saenuri Party a couple of hours ago in the morning named its single candidate Lee Won-gu new floor leader without a vote, alongside his running mate Ju Ho-young as the head of the party's policy committee. Lee is a member of a faction close to President Park, while Chu is part of a different faction. Now, as the opposition, a New Politics Alliance for Democracy, heads to the polls this afternoon, the four-way race between lawmakers from different party factions is expected to determine the dynamics of party leadership. And this follows the merging of the former Democratic Party and independent lawmaker An Chol-su's party in March, and the final vote there is currently underway.
When the latest news meets the latest business stories, we give you a bigger and better picture of the world. Business Today with Moon Gon-young. Every weekday, only on ARIRANG.
Now, before we get on to North Korean news that's just coming in, Park Young-sun of the main opposition has been named the new floor leader of the main opposition party here in Korea, and she will be the first female to lead that party, and we'll have more on that story in our later newscast. Now, the final verdict is in. The 3 unmanned aerial vehicles recently found on South Korean soil did in fact come from North Korea. Seoul's defense ministry released the findings from its over a month-long probe. Our national defense correspondent Kim Hyun-bin has the details.
A joint South Korea-U.S. investigative team looking into the 3 unmanned aerial vehicles that were discovered in South Korea over a 2-week period starting in late March has stated definitely that they were sent from the north. The team's report says the drones were headed back when they crashed after running out of fuel. The GPS coordinates of the UAV show that they flew over key military facilities and took dozens of pictures, a clear violation of Korea's Armistice Agreement and the Non-Aggression Pact, which forbids the North and South from infiltrating each other's airspace. South Korea's defense ministry called it a clear military provocation, and they plan to submit the results of their findings to the United Nations. North Korea has hundreds of unmanned aerial vehicles in its possession, and dozens of others are believed to have flown over the south before returning safely to the north. When modified, experts say these surveillance-purpose drones could hold up to 10 kilograms of explosives. It's raised concerns about possible attacks, and the South Korean military admits a gap in its security. While it says it's well equipped to deal with enemy jet incursions and attack UAVs, they have a much harder time detecting these smaller drones. Seoul says it plans to purchase low-altitude radar and other military gadgetry to prevent further infiltrations. Kim Hyun-bin, ARIRANG News.
Speculation continues to swirl that North Korea is gearing up to make good on its threat and conduct a fourth and a new form of nuclear test. South Korea is taking the threat very seriously, but it also has a warning of its own. Any nuclear test will be met with severe consequences. Here's our Song Ji-yeon with this report.
If Pyongyang pushes ahead with a fourth nuclear test and defies the international community, it can expect swift and strong punishment. This was the gist of the South Korean foreign minister's warning to North Korea when he said the regime would pay the heaviest price in new sanctions. Chairing a meeting at the UN Security Council on Wednesday, Yoon Byung-se said a test would have a huge impact on the strategic landscape in Northeast Asia and would pose a serious challenge to Beijing as well.
We must clearly warn North Korea that if it challenges the international community with another nuclear test, it will be met with the most serious consequences.
At the same time, Yoon stressed Seoul wants to build a peaceful and new Korean peninsula through President Park Geun-hye's reunification drive. But Pyongyang continues to verbally attack President Park's initiatives. The North Korean daily Rodong Sinmun said Thursday that Park's ambition is only stirring the potential for war. It also says South Korean government was fooling the nation with a diabolical idea. Meanwhile, the U.S. confirmed Wednesday that Secretary of State John Kerry met with Wang Jia-rui, China's international director of the Communist Party. Wang, considered a key messenger between China's Communist Party and North Korea's Workers' Party, is believed to have discussed a possible resumption of the six-party talks on North Korea's denuclearization. Song Ji-yeon, ARIRANG News.
And in yet another indication of the dire poverty in medical care most ordinary North Koreans are forced to accept, new data shows an unacceptable number of children in that country die before their 5th birthday. The Seoul-based Korea Development Institute said Thursday that 53 out of 1,000 North Korean children below the age of 5 died in 2012. That's up by 5 deaths compared to the year 2000. In South Korea, only 3 out of 1,000 children of the same age group died. The ratio of children with chronic malnutrition in the north has actually dropped sharply since 2000, but it still stood at 28% in 2012. Well, the professor who led the study says it's impossible to verify whether the nutritional status of North Korean children has improved that much, considering the increase in the number of young deaths. Well, online shopping in this country is about to get a lot easier. Starting at the end of this month, financial authorities will scrap the current system that requires consumers to use electronic banking certificates when making purchases of over 300,000 won, or roughly $290 from online shopping malls. The system as it stands now makes it very difficult for foreigners living in this country and people overseas to shop on Korean sites. And the measure is part of the government's deregulation drive, which attempts to cut out the red tape that hampers business activities. But the online verification process isn't going away for good. As a security measure, Koreans will still be required to go through this when transferring money online that exceeds $290. Well, the stresses and strains of modern life make some people seek a release in the form of alcohol or cigarettes. Latest figure shows, however, that more Koreans are turning away from smoking, but they are spending more of their money on alcohol. Statistics Korea says the percentage of a household's monthly expenditure on cigarettes has tumbled year after year for almost a decade now. Korean households spent around $17 a month on tobacco last year, which is about 0.7% of their total monthly spending, which is down sharply from 2008. Households spent slightly over $10 a month on alcoholic beverages last year, which is over 0.4% of their monthly outgoings. and the corresponding figure in 2008 was 0.3% range. Well, when it comes to life satisfaction, Koreans rank near the bottom of the list. Korea scored 6 points out of 10 on the OECD Better Life Index 2014, placing it 25th among the 36 nations surveyed. The index measures the happiness quotient of a nation based on 11 categories, including education, work and life balance. Now, the average for the 36 nations come to 6.6. The OECD cited Korea's propensity for working long hours for its low rankings. Koreans work an average of 2,090 hours a year, which is much higher than the OECD average of 1,765 hours. Australia topped the list of most satisfied countries, followed by Norway and Sweden. The Korean won's strength against the U.S. dollar is raising concerns among local exporters who stand to lose price competitiveness overseas. But as our Hwang Ji-hye reports, it's really the small and medium-sized enterprises that should be most concerned.
The Korean won continues to hover around its highest level in nearly 6 years, currently trading at the 1,020 level against the U.S. dollar. Last month, the local currency strengthened more than 3% against the greenback, the biggest appreciation among the world's 40 major currencies. While experts predict the Korean won to remain strong for the time being, with the nation's current account balance remaining in the black for a prolonged period of time, they believe that the impact on local exporters will be limited.
I don't think it'll have that big an impact, but I do want to remind people that, well, during normal times, Korean won was always around $1,000 won per dollar. Right. Just before the Asian financial crisis, it was in the high 900s, and right before the global financial crisis, it was around 1,000. So it may be that the period we had for the last 4 years was sort of the abnormal period, and we were just getting back to normality.
Experts say what's really worrying are the small and medium-sized companies that are not fully prepared for the changes in exchange rates.
Well, the government, for the small and medium-sized companies, they instituted things like exchange rate insurance. Now, two problems. One is that it's not as widely known as it should be among small and medium-sized enterprises, so they don't take advantage of it. And then the second problem is the amount that they set aside for it may not be enough to cover a lot of the SMEs. So that program and other programs designed to hedge against exchange rate changes should be made larger, and it should be advertised more.
With concerns lingering that the economic growth could be hurt by slowing private consumption due to the Sewol-ho ferry disaster, coupled with the strong local currency, the government has announced it will hold an emergency meeting led by President Park Geun-hye on Friday. Hwang Ji-hye, ARIRANG News.
Well, corporate Korea has turned in a disappointing scorecard for 2013. New data compiled by market researchers shows that the combined pre-tax profits of 87 affiliates of the nation's 10 major conglomerates dropped almost 15% to around $50 billion last year from 2012. Of course, this cannot be good news for the Korean economy. Let's take a closer look at this issue. Our regular contributor, Dr. Kim Byung-ju, joins me live in the studio. Good afternoon to you, Dr. Kim.
Good afternoon.
So the nation's corporate profit is on the decline, and that cannot be good news, right? I mean, for each of the top 10 conglomerates that saw profits decline, how were they affected last year?
Well, not good at all. As you mentioned, only 2 out of the 10 are showing their profits actually increasing from year 2012 to year 2013. And let's bring up the numbers on the screen here. And Hyundai Motor and SK are the ones, as you can see, number 2 and number 3 here on the screen are the ones that saw their profits increasing from year 2012 to year 2013. Other than that, Samsung Electronics, Samsung Group itself, because some people are saying of their dividends being paid off and all that, their net profit decreased from the previous year to last year. And LG, Lotte, all others, even POSCO, and some of the groups like GS and Hanjin, which runs Korean Air, actually showed their net loss continuing for 2 years here. So indeed, overall, this is a disappointing performance. And as you can see at the bottom, the total profits made back in 2 years ago to 2012, it was over 60 trillion, but last year it was slightly over 52 trillion. So that's why they're talking about 15% drop. And so this overall shows the overall challenges that the Korean corporate world, especially the largest companies, are facing at this point.
Well, what's probably even more troubling is the fact that when Samsung Group is taken out of this equation, the net profit or net profit drop for the top players amount to roughly 30%. And that just highlights the growing dominance of Samsung in the market, right?
Growing dominance and at the same time growing vulnerability, if you will, where Korean economy is so much dependent upon Samsung Group itself and also Hyundai Motor perhaps added. So rather than those two players, we don't have much left, some of the pessimists are saying. The unit here is percentage. I forgot to show it right there, but this is last year. And as you mentioned, Samsung's net profit share of the total is slightly over 51%. And Hyundai Motor Group slightly over 28%. Actually, Samsung's share has decreased from the previous year. Before that, meaning that year 2012, it used to be about over 52%, so slight decrease for Samsung. But for Hyundai, it was a considerable increase from about 24% from a year ago. And SK showed also a slight increase in terms of their relative share there. And others, well, we're not even showing the rest of the top 10 here because even if you add up the rest of the top 10, their total comes out in negative. So once again, quite a challenging situation here.
Well, it's just the fact that even though the share of Samsung declined from the year before, still it's more than half of the entire market here in Korea. So that's probably not healthy at all. If one falls, if Samsung falls, the Korean economy would be much affected by that.
And we are continuously being reminded of what happened to Nokia.
Right, definitely so. Now, while most of the business groups are making less money, obviously, what we see from the graph and everything, critics are saying that the actual owner families of these conglomerates are, in fact, taking home more money than ever. Now, is that a fair criticism?
I think it is. It's a controversial point. And let's bring up those interesting numbers that we have prepared. We've been talking about, how much the overall executive pay here has been and how much gap it's showing in comparison with average, workers' pay and all that. What you're seeing here, it looks a little bit complicated here, but basically the first, second, and third, they are all about how much the so-called owner, chairman, and family got paid, and compare that with the right-hand side. In the middle, the so-called hired chief executive pays, like a second best paid person in the group. And the difference comes down to all the way to the right-hand side. So biggest one you see is the SK Corporation, for instance. The difference between Chairman Cha Tae-won's pay and the pay level of the president, Mr. YT Kim, it's about 8 times as bigger for Chairman Cha Tae-won. The thing is, this is not as bad as what's happening in Wall Street, for instance. I mean, they don't have owner, chaebol, chairmen, but still their top executives get paid a lot more than this. So I don't think this is that controversial. Still, it is, I have to admit, it is indeed controversial and interesting. And some people are saying while these corporations are making less and less money, these chaebol owner families are taking more money. So indeed, the controversy remains.
Right, right. It's something that we actually discussed weeks ago, and it's something that we'll probably revisit once again.
So.
Now, for a wrap-up, what do we see ahead for Korea's leading business groups?
Well, as we were reminded by the numbers that we were just seeing here today, perhaps other than Samsung and Hyundai Motor and perhaps SK, which seems to be doing quite good based on their telecom and chemical business here, other chaebol companies, the so-called right below the top players, they seem to face big challenge here in declining profits here, and they really got to find their new future path in terms of letting their businesses grow in the long run here. A lot of people have been long talking about the smooth transition into the so-called service-based, knowledge-intensive industry and all that, but we haven't seen the evidence of success here in Korea. So we are very much looking forward to it. Looks like the transition will be still far and distant here. Some people are saying culture, entertainment, and the leisure industries are the one to get into, but we'll have to wait and see until we actually see the actual tangible cases of these right below the top players among the chaebol groups making their success.
All right, definitely so, and something that we should revisit, an item that we should revisit in the latter half of this year.
Okay.
All right, Dr. Kim Young-ji, thank you so much for today.
Thank you.
And that is your business today on this Thursday. Thank you for watching, and do join us again at 6 p.m. Korea time on Early Edition at 6.